Look at the edge of that driveway. By the time you can actually see crabgrass sitting there, pale and low against your good grass, it has already done the one thing that matters most. It has dropped its seed into the ground weeks before you ever notice the plant itself. Think back to last July. You knelt down and pulled it, or you mixed up a jug of weed killer and walked the whole yard with it. It curled up and turned brown right on schedule. And then this spring, in that same exact spot, it showed up again like nothing had happened. That is not because you did something wrong. That is what happens every time somebody fights the plant they can see instead of the seed it already left behind in the soil. The plant sitting in your yard right now is not actually your problem. Your problem is everything that plant has already buried where you cannot see it. There is one habit in this list that explains why the weed keeps coming back to the exact same patch, no matter how many summers you have pulled it. There is a second one that almost every single homeowner does wrong with their mower, without ever realizing it is the reason the weed keeps spreading to parts of the yard that never had it before. And there is a third one, the cheapest thing on this entire list, that stops the whole cycle before it ever gets started. My name is Caleb. I grew up on a small farm in Holmes County, Ohio, in a family that has never once called in a lawn service or a chemical crew to deal with what grows in the yard. Everything I'm going to walk you through here is built on timing and paying attention, not on a bag from the hardware store with a brand name on it. Those two things do not cost you a dime. If any of this is useful to you, stick around, because there is a lot more where it came from. Learning to see it before it takes over. Most grass in your yard grows the way you would expect it to. It comes up from a single point and reaches straight for the sun. Crabgrass does not do that. It spreads outward low to the ground, branching out in every direction from the center of the plant, almost like the spread legs of a crab, which is exactly where it gets its name. Once you have seen it once, you cannot unsee it. The color is often the first thing that gives it away, even before the shape does. It sits a shade or two lighter than the turf around it, almost a washed-out green next to your regular grass, and it grows the fastest during the hottest, driest stretch of summer, right when your good lawn is struggling just to hang on. If you want to spot it quickly, do not look straight down at your lawn. Get low and look across it at an angle instead. The lighter patches will jump out against the darker grass around them, almost like a shadow running the wrong way. It always shows up in the same kinds of places: bare dirt, thin, stressed turf, the edge of a walking path where feet or tires have packed the ground down. Anywhere your lawn has thinned out or gotten worn down, that is where crabgrass moves in, because it needs open soil to get started in the first place. A lawn that is thick and healthy simply will not give it the room it needs. Learn to recognize this one first, because there are two other weeds that get mistaken for it constantly, and if you treat the wrong one the same way, you will spend years fighting a battle you can never actually win. The lesson. My uncle never explained. Out loud. I want to tell you something my uncle used to do every spring, because it took me years to understand why he bothered. Before he touched a single weed in the yard, he would walk the whole property first, slow, almost like he was inspecting fence posts instead of grass. When he found a patch that looked off, he would kneel down, take hold of it low near the base, and pull with just enough pressure to see how it responded. Some patches came straight up out of the ground, root and all, without much of a fight. Others held firm and snapped off right at the soil line, leaving everything underneath still sitting there in the dirt. He was not guessing, he was testing every single patch, because he had learned the hard way that two different weeds that look almost identical from a distance need two completely different responses, and treating them the same way wastes an entire growing season. Nutsage is one of the imitators. It shows up in low, damp corners of the yard, near a downspout, along a drainage ditch, anywhere water tends to sit after a storm. It grows a shiny, almost waxy blade that stands taller and stiffer than the grass around it, and if you pull it, you will usually find a small round tuber, about the size of a pea, still buried underneath. That tuber is the whole problem. It survives underground through the winter the same way a bulb does, which means no amount of stopping seeds will ever touch it. The only real fix is digging the tuber out directly, and even then, a piece left behind can start the whole patch over again. Quackgrass is the second imitator, and it is the one that fools people the longest, because it comes back thicker every single year in the exact same spot, no matter how many times the top growth gets cut down or pulled. It has a coarse blade with a noticeable white, almost fibrous root system that spreads sideways underground through something called a rhizome, a root that travels and sends up new shoots as it goes. If you have fought the same patch for 3 summers straight and it always comes back heavier than before, there is a real chance it is quackgrass, not crabgrass, and you have been treating a perennial like it was an annual the entire time. Crabgrass does not survive any of that. The first hard frost of the year kills it completely, roots and all with no exceptions. Every single plant you see in October is dead by the time the ground freezes, and whatever comes back the following spring comes back purely from seed, nothing else. That single fact changes the entire strategy. A weed with a living root underground has to be dug up by hand every time, or it just keeps returning. A weed that only survives through its seed can be stopped before that seed ever lands, which means you are not actually fighting the plant at all. You are fighting a window of time. Get this distinction right, and you stop wasting entire seasons treating the wrong problem the wrong way. The mistake almost everyone makes with a mower. Here is something that took me embarrassingly long to notice myself, and it has nothing to do with which spray or fertilizer you buy. A single mature crabgrass plant does not drop a modest little handful of seed. It can drop several thousand seeds from one plant alone. And those seeds do not politely stay where the plant was standing. They ride out on the bottom of your work boots. They cling to a dog's paws after a run across the yard. A stiff wind carries the lightest ones a surprising distance, and a hard summer rain will wash the rest downhill into whatever low spot collects water in your yard, where they sit quietly and wait for spring. But the single fastest way that seed travels, the one almost nobody ever stops to think about, is the mower itself. If you mow your lawn on a normal schedule, and at some point you cut through crabgrass that has already gone to seed, and you do not clean underneath the deck before your next pass, you are physically hauling that seed to every other section of yard you cut afterward. It does not matter how careful you are anywhere else. That one pass undoes it. And if someone else cuts your grass for you, a landscaper, a neighbor's kid, anyone does, and their mower deck was caked with seed from an earlier job that same morning, that seed comes home with them and lands in your yard whether you ever laid eyes on the plant it came from or not. The plant itself was never really the enemy. The seed it drops is the actual threat. And the seed does not wait around for you to notice the problem before it starts moving on to new ground. Here's the fix, and it takes less than a minute. Anytime you mow through a patch that has visibly gone to seed, you will recognize it by the small, finger-like seed heads standing up above the rest of the blades. Stop before you continue on to the rest of the yard. Tip the mower up on its side and knock the underside of the deck clean with a stiff brush. A basic deck cleaning brush costs only a few dollars at almost any hardware store, and it will save you from personally hauling the problem across ground that was completely clean 5 minutes earlier. If your mower has a bagging attachment, empty the clippings into a bucket instead of straight onto your compost pile. Most home compost setups never get hot enough, consistently enough, to actually kill crabgrass seed. Whatever goes into that pile can come right back out the following spring when you spread that same compost across a garden bed or a bare patch of lawn, and you will have planted the exact problem you were trying to get rid of. You will not kill every single plant this season just by cleaning your mower deck. But keeping it from spreading its seed any further is the difference between fighting a small, manageable patch again next year and fighting an entire yard full of it. Why it only shows up in certain spots. Crabgrass does not care one bit about your lawn as a whole. It cares specifically about bare, open ground, and it will find every last patch of it you have, no matter how small. On our place, it always shows up along the fence line by the barn, right where the goats push through toward the water trough every morning, nowhere else on the property. That narrow strip stays worn down and open just enough to let sunlight hit bare soil, which is the one condition crabgrass seed absolutely needs before it will even attempt to germinate. Walk your own yard and pay attention to exactly where it shows up. The thin strip along the edge of the driveway, the path worn into the grass where the dog runs the same loop every single day. the bare patch by the gate that nobody ever bothered to reseed, none of these are random. Sunlight has to reach bare dirt for the seed to wake up at all, and those spots are the only places in your entire yard where that happens, because everywhere else your existing grass is already standing in the way of the light. The one change that costs you nothing but a mower setting. Here is the single adjustment that does more work for less effort than anything else on this list. Raise your mower deck to somewhere between 3 and 3.5 inches and leave it there for the rest of the growing season. Grass left that tall shades the soil directly underneath it, and that shade keeps the ground both cooler and darker at exactly the moment crabgrass seed needs warmth and direct light to sprout. Cut any shorter than that, and you are personally opening the door for it every single time you run the mower. That single change costs you absolutely nothing beyond turning a dial or flipping a lever on your mower. And it actually gets more effective every year that passes, because a taller, thicker lawn leaves less and less bare ground behind for next year's seed to land on in the first place. Fall is when the fight is actually won or lost. Most people stop thinking about their lawn completely once summer ends, and that is exactly the season that quietly decides what next summer is going to look like. Overseeding your thin and bare patches works best about 6 to 8 weeks before your first expected hard frost, while the soil still holds some warmth from summer, but the air has started to cool off. That window gives new grass just enough time to root in and thicken up before crabgrass season arrives again the following spring. By the time the ground finally warms up enough the next year for crabgrass seed to wake up, those same bare spots are already covered in grass with a full season of root growth behind them. This is by far the cheapest habit on this entire list. A bag of grass seed suited to your region costs a small fraction of what a season of chemical treatments runs, and it fixes the actual root of the problem instead of chasing the plant after the fact. On our farm, my aunt keeps an old flour tin filled with saved seed every fall, set aside specifically for patching bare spots like this before the ground freezes for winter. Overseed the thin strip along your driveway, the worn path your dog has carved into the yard, and any bare gap you walked past all summer without thinking twice about it. Water it in gently and let the cooler fall weather and the slow months of winter do the quiet work of thickening your lawn before the weed ever gets another shot at it. A thick, healthy lawn is the cheapest pre-emergent treatment there is, and it works every single year without you doing anything more than mowing it correctly. Timing matters more than the calendar ever will. That covers the ground itself. The other half of this entire problem is knowing exactly when to act, and this is the single habit almost every homeowner gets wrong, myself included, for longer than I would like to admit. Crabgrass seed has no idea what the date on your calendar says. It only responds to the actual temperature of the soil around it. Once that soil has held steady at around 55 degrees Fahrenheit for several days in a row, the seed starts pushing upward, whether the calendar says it is early spring or late spring where you live. That temperature mark hits at wildly different times depending on where you are. In the deep south, it can arrive as early as late January. Through the middle of the country, it typically lands sometime in March. Further north, closer to the Canadian border, it might not show up until late April, or even into May. A one-size-fits-all date printed on the back of a bag has no way of knowing which of those situations describes your yard. Push a simple soil probe thermometer a couple of inches into the ground somewhere that gets regular direct sun, and check it every few mornings once late winter starts turning toward early spring wherever you live. Once it holds steady at 55 degrees or higher for several days running, that is your window. A basic probe thermometer costs only a few dollars at most hardware or garden stores. Once you hit that window, put down corn gluten meal instead of a synthetic pre-emergent off a store shelf. Spread it evenly across the lawn, and it will stop any seed that is just starting to sprout without harming grass that is already established and growing. It is the same material farms have used on pasture ground for far longer than any lawn care company has existed, and most standard garden centers do not even carry it, so it is worth calling around or checking a farm supply store directly. That is the entire habit. Check the actual ground instead of the calendar on your wall and put down what stops the seed before it ever breaks through the surface. If you are already behind this season, all of this works best when you get ahead of it early, but if you are watching this in the middle of summer with the season already well underway, here is where things actually stand for you right now. If it is already August and the crabgrass in your yard is tall, spreading, and starting to show seed heads, the plant is past the point where pulling it by hand does what it would have done back in May. By this stage, the roots have spread wide enough that a mature plant tends to snap off right at the surface rather than come up whole, and everything left rooted behind you keeps making seed the entire time you are working. Here is what actually matters at this point in the year. The first hard frost is going to kill every single crabgrass plant in your yard completely on its own, whether you spend money treating it or not. Spraying a mature plant in August just to make it die is spending money on something the season was already about to do for free in a matter of weeks. What the frost will not undo is the seed already sitting in your soil from everything that matured before you ever noticed it. That seed does not die along with the plant. It waits patiently for next spring. So the actual job right now is not killing the plant in front of you. It is keeping as much of it as possible from finishing what it came here to do. If you have not already raised your mowing height, do it now before any more seed heads get the chance to fully form and drop. Clean your mower deck every single time you cut through a patch already showing seed heads, because this is exactly the point in the season when one careless pass does the most lasting damage. And if a patch is small enough to pull by hand, do it right after a rain when the ground is soft, accepting that some of it will snap off rather than pull free whole. None of this saves the season you are already in. What it does is shrink how much seed ends up sitting in your ground for next year, which is the only thing that really decides how big a fight you are walking into come spring. Mark your calendar right now while the frustration is still fresh in your mind to start checking your soil temperature once late winter turns toward early spring where you live. That one small note is the entire difference between fighting this same battle all over again or finally getting ahead of it for good. What this actually changes. I will be straightforward with you. None of this makes crabgrass disappear from the face of the earth. What it does is take away the exact conditions the weed depends on to keep spreading: the bare soil, the seed left to mature undisturbed, the timing missed by a few critical weeks, one piece at a time, until there is measurably less of it to fight every single year that follows. A lawn care company does not make its living telling you to raise your mower a notch and check your own soil with a $5 thermometer. That is exactly why most people never get walked through this plainly in the first place. We learned it the slow way, one growing season at a time, on ground that has always had to earn its own keep. If any part of this saves you from fighting the same patch of weeds twice next year, that is really all this was meant to do. Stay patient with it. Stay deliberate about the timing, and you will find there is a lot less of this fight waiting for you than you think.